it deals with the political history of different Arab states like Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Sudan, Yemen, and Algeria. Now I would like first to invite Mr. Madhan, Director of GGU Library, to give his welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Habatul Adam. And I would like to form, on behalf of Jindal Global University and Global Library and Jindal School of International Affairs and the Jindal Center for the Global South, I would like to formally welcome you all for this book talk event. We are fortunate to have the author of the book that we are going to speak about, this Arab Spring that was and wasn't. And we have distinguished scholars. After the author talk, we are going to have a kind of book discussion, which will be moderated by Habatullah Adam. And the panelists are Professor Sriram Chaulia, a prolific author, is the Dean of International School of International Affairs, JGU, and Ambassador Professor Abdul Fattah Amora. They will discuss about the book in detail. So a warm welcome to all of you, and then not much taking time, I would like to call Professor Sriram Chaulia to give his open remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madanji. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see a sizable turnout for a topic that has somewhat faded from public memory and imagination. Last year, 2021, you will remember, was the 10th anniversary of the uprisings, and there were some retrospectives we read in the news media. But Ambassador Fabian, of course, who is a very distinguished retired diplomat and has a long standing in this what we call WANA region, West Asia, North Africa, or MENA, Middle East and North Africa. He's not only pieced together all the individual countries which underwent major turmoil or did not undergo turmoil, which was the case. And what he has done, of course, is also travel to the region, speak to a lot of stakeholders in a number of these affected countries and the neighboring countries after the events. 2013, 14, 15, number of years he has been observing the evolution of this very, very important chapter in the contemporary world history. You will all probably recall, younger people may not recall, but we very distinctly recall the events of 2011 and the way they shook up not just the region but the world with a lot of expectations and hope. Ambassador Fabian talks about how, poetically he talks about the hope that underlay these many of these uprisings, which seem to stem from pent-up grievances over a long period of time against regimes that had been in power for decades. So there is this simple, if you have a very simple lens to understand what happened and why it happened, it's clear that there were some grievances and they accumulated over time, and there was an economic crisis, and the grievances plus economic crisis in an atmosphere of political repression in these countries combined and became combustible fuel for the explosions that we saw in the form of mass protests as well as armed uprisings. There's of course a more complex story, and that's what the book weaves, which is the run-up to and the subsequent responses also had many more factors other than just people's grievances. So what he's showing is that there are many interested players, domestic elites, regional elites, international elites, who had a hand either in fueling the discontent or in the crushing of the discontent, depending on country to country, the equations with the external players. So the foreign hand, this is something of course undeniable, and this is something that he has done great research and asked some very critical questions about especially the role of the major powers, but also Russia that intervened in a number of these countries, especially in Syria and Libya. And what he's trying to ask is how war became business, how the counter-revolution also became a business, which is why most of these fires have been extinguished by now. And he's also showing at various junctures some critical mistakes made by actors who are in the hot spot or in the hot seats, and how this is always the case with revolutions or revolutionary processes, that inadvertent mistakes or errors made by key people at critical junctures lead to the opening of the floodgates. But also, what is interesting is the concern about human dignity and human values and human worth, which have completely been set aside, especially after the revolts, the way they were crushed, and the kind of interventions that we saw. And there's a very interesting chapter, a short one, towards the end, also about the rise of ISIS and these so-called transnational actors, and how, in a way, they were spawned by the series of interventions that even preceded the Arab Spring uprisings of 2011. So, but what Ambassador Fabian is saying is that revolution is a process, not a moment or a singular event. So, what has been unleashed 2011, even though it's been bottled up in most of the countries, with the slight exception of Tunisia, almost everywhere else you've seen that none of the so-called people's movement succeeded in establishing any kind of accountable or changing the status quo. Simply, the status quo has not been changed. Whether we call it democratization or something else, status quo has not been changed. And Ambassador Fabian, and I agree with him, where he says that in some of the cases, status quo ante was even better than what it is today. Such as, for example, in Egypt, where if you look at the human rights situation, it was a lot worse. It's a lot worse today than it was under Hosni Mubarak. I think, and the same goes with Libya. The situation today is a lot worse than it was under Muammar Gaddafi. He also makes a very interesting comparative analysis in the book, and which I think for students it's a very good point of takeoff, is why the monarchies survived, why only the secular regimes were overthrown briefly, but even then the system came back. The individuals went away. Gaddafi was killed, Mubarak was ousted, Abdullah Ali Saleh was removed in Yemen, but then the system remained and the system came back. But at least some figureheads were toppled at the peak of the moment of the revolutionary frenzy. But why is it that the monarchy survived? And it's worth reading to explain the differences because there are authoritarian system, but within authoritarian system there is a variegation. What he's showing is a kind of a comparative analysis. Monarchical authoritarian systems, Jordan, all the Gulf monarchies, Morocco, these survived without facing Bahrain, without facing breaking into a sweat. But then the secular regimes were toppled, and we continue to see more unrest there. And in a way, the monarchies also dabbled into the secular regimes, and that's what he's showing in the book, the role of Saudi and allied forces in stoking these so-called proxy wars or civil wars across the region. So I think there's no one villain in the book, if you like. I mean, there's no singular cause for all the mayhem and the destruction that we have seen. What he's showing is, but there are no saints either. And it's hard to find a hero in the book. So in that sense, it's a very depressing story. But then I think ultimately Ambassador Fabian is saying that people's aspirations are the only reasons for hope. And those don't go away, right? They keep coming back. That's why we keep seeing cycles of protest. Just last week, if you have all followed, in Iran, which is of course not covered here, there is significant unrest across multiple cities. And from time to time, in these kind of systems, you find these kind of mass protests erupting over issues that may either snowball into something huge and systemic, as in the case of in 2011, or may simply be crushed over a course of a few weeks through a mixture of co-option and brute force. Iranians, which of course are not covered here, although Iran is a player in the sense that it's intervened in many of these Arab Spring cases, but there was no upheaval in Iran itself per se that he has covered in the book. But you see that they also have these cycles of it's like a pressure cooker. You know, the valve lifts a bit and lets off some steam, and then again the whistle falls back. So it's that kind of pressure cooker like situation. He has gone to great length. Generally, people who study the region go into one or two major countries or three or four, but he has done enormous research into covering nearly 10 or more countries in the region, and especially the empirical facts also he has disputed what the Western narratives have portrayed as the reasons for these upheavals, or the way they evolved and the way they died down, as well as the non-Western interpretations of what happened. And of course, the big question, of course, which of course he doesn't address, and I wish I could have seen that, is what is the future of this region? Is it going to remain in these so-called fossilized kind of authoritarian systems, or is there more dynamism now? Ambassador Fabian says that, look, Napoleon came back within 10 to 15 years of the French Revolution. That doesn't mean the French Revolution was worthless or meaningless. Right? That's an interesting parallel he makes. And Napoleon's nephew, Louis Napoleon, came back in the early 19th century and continued a kind of a hereditary dictatorship, or tried to continue it. So revolutions probably don't go in a straight line. They are not linear, and you will find many twists and turns. And maybe we are still in the early stages of this, and only time will tell. And that's what I think Ambassador Fabian is saying. And of course, I think I can see, as an Indian diplomat who was served in this region, he was in Iran in 1979 during the Islamic Revolution. I think he brings a certain critical perspective that you often don't get from the mainstream Western specialists writing in English. And for those who are from the region, like my esteemed colleague, because they are seeing it from the ground up, they have suffered in the last 10, 12 years. So they probably also look at it in a different way. But this is one unique perspective of a very empathetic observer, whose, I think, his heart and soul lies with people's aspirations for accountable governance and for dignified life. But then how these aspirations get channeled or mobilized and ultimately even hijacked by vested interest groups. This is the real tragedy of the Arab Spring. Or, in fact, Ambassador Fabian even asked for decolonizing the terminology. Why do we even call it Arab Spring? He says that this itself comes from a journal article written in Foreign Affairs magazine by an American scholar. And he says actually in the region it was called as a dignity revolution or some other forms of uprisings rather than as an Arab Spring. The Arab Spring obviously is a pun on the Prague Spring, which comes from the Cold War period in the former Soviet space, when there was a revolt in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. So what he's saying is to look at this very critically and to challenge the established myths about what happened, who is responsible, who is the quote-unquote the bad guy in the situation. He's actually challenging all those norms. So it's worth reading and worth thinking about. I only wanted to see maybe a more broader regional analysis beyond just individual countries as to what is the future for this, and whether the 20th century, the post-colonial fate of these countries since the mid-20th century, is it going to repeat itself and continue in the 21st, or does he see a shift happening, especially with the demographics? There's a very interesting point about age in the book. He talks about Tunisia, I think, in the first chapter, about the, septuagenarians and octogenarians who are running the show. And when you have the median age in the Middle East is 22 in the MENA region. It's 22 as the average age. But most of the rulers, barring a few, I mean, you could argue that Bashar al-Assad is not an old man, nor is Mohammed bin Salman. But then they are inheritors of a system that has been there for a long time. So in that sense, whether the age of the ruler probably is less important than the system, which seems to be continuing in one form or the other, deep state or whatever you want to call it. So I think it's a very good empirical study. I would have liked to see more generalizations about the fate of the region as a whole, or at least a subset of countries, and also some kind of a stronger connection between the economic grievances and the way these revolts set off. I mean, he's talked about the reasons why in each country the spark was lit, but it would have been helpful to offer a generalization as to what are the factors that could reignite this revolution, this wave of revolutions again. There's also a framework, I mean, it's a Western one, but it's an interesting one, which is the idea of waves, and the democratization happens in waves. This is Huntington's thesis, and there is the notion of the reverse wave. So in 2011, it looked like many of these regimes will be toppled, but by now you see that there have hardly been any changes except cosmetic removal. I mean, for example, if al-Bashir of Sudan is gone, it doesn't mean the military and the deep state is gone. Right? They are still there. If Bouteflika of Algeria is gone, it doesn't mean the deep state or the system is still not in control. Mubarak is gone, the system has come back even more vehemently than before. So why are these systems so resilient? And I hope that Ambassador Fabian will answer this. And maybe it's not such a big puzzle anymore nowadays, because democracy itself is seen as retreating around the world, especially in the last 10 years or so. But the Arab Spring was one such, eureka type moment when people said, okay, something huge is happening and this is going to change the world forever. But it hasn't happened as much as people hoped, and in many ways some people call it as consider it, the whole thing as a conspiracy itself to destabilize and to further weaken these countries. But I won't say much beyond read this book and think about what's the link between regime stability, economic distress, and external interference. If you add up these three, you will get a fair picture of what is likely to happen in these countries. Of course, most of us make wrong predictions and have, we've had to eat our words. But the point is, I also at that time believed that this was the beginning of a new wave of democratization. And there was something universal about it, and people thought actually that the exceptionalism of that region, the so-called exceptionalism, that they are happy, or that they're happy with authoritarian rule. They don't want Western style, democracy. They don't have these kind of aspirations. They're different. Their culture, the political culture is different. Ambassador Fabian himself challenges it. He says that the stereotype of a sleepy or a politically somnolent Arab is not true, and he talks about successive revolts and rebellions and uprisings that have happened even before the Arab Spring. So clearly there is some human spirit. What you're seeing in Iran, you can't argue that it is all manipulated or that it's being it's a conspiracy to weaken the regime from outside. Even if there are conspirators, there's no fire, no smoke without a fire, right? So the point is, there is discontent in all these societies. It may be building up again, and you don't know in what way it will come forward. In fact, the cases of North Africa are interesting. Apart from Libya, with Sudan and with Morocco and with Algeria, the changes are the revolutionary push has come more later or more recently in the last 4 or 5 years, 2018-19, not in 2011. So the overthrow of al-Bashir in Sudan seemed like again a kind of a start of this a second or an extended wave, but then we don't know because there is so much struggle going on about power and about holding on to power and the privileges of power, the economic pie which people want to control and never let go, come what may. So read the book, please, and I strongly recommend it. And I think it opens some lines or channels for further inquiry. Thank you.
Yes. Now may I request Ambassador K.P. Fabian to talk about his book, Author Talk.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Dear Dean, dear Ambassador and Professor, dear Director Library, and dear Professor Dr. Hepatullah Adam, and my friend sitting there, and dear young scholars. I am much excited to be with you. I have visited many universities in so many countries, but this is much greener, younger, and I can see that there is a lot of, real intellectual, open to new ideas, activity going on. So congratulations. Well, if I had my life again, I would have come and joined as one of you. Well, I listened very carefully, and I can tell you one thing. If I have a second edition, I've got enough material to add. Because you raised very important points, and you commented on the book, and then you commended the book also. Thank you. But, talking about what might happen, well, one can speculate. It's an unscripted drama which is being enacted. And my view is that, as you mentioned, was it in 1799, Napoleon came back as a first consul and, powers and all that. That was 1789, 1799. But still the revolutionary ideas of France, they spread across Europe and the world, So I have a feeling, the Arab Spring, the title, of course, we can discuss, but those ideals, that is, people have a right to choose their rulers. In fact, one of the, mottos was, we want to bring down this regime, but people have a right. I think that right will get more and more established, but not tomorrow, because democracy can be used to undermine democracy, as has happened in Tunisia. You all know that. Now, thank you for inviting me, for organizing this in such a beautiful way. You have been, doing it with Teutonic efficiency, because you even send a pilot car to make sure that I will reach here. Because with all the construction that is going on, Now, the term Global South reminds me of my days in Vienna, 69-72, when at UNIDO we were fighting for a new international economic order. Of course, we didn't win the fight, but I remember at that time a Canadian professor saying, "You are talking of order, but don't you understand that there is so much disorder in the world? When people speak of the international order, political order, or economic order, well, I think what we have to understand as students of politics is that, though the talk is about order, the reality is more disorder than order." Now, I am very happy to be here because I got this book, Drifts and Dynamics. You must have seen it.
Yeah, my colleagues.
Yes, and I'm trying to arrange for a book discussion at the India International Center. Now, coming to my book, I should now, with the permission of Dr. Hebatullah Adam, that we had discussed the book, and in fact, what I have said about Egypt, you did not agree, but we disagreed agreeably. Correct? Now, that shows the true spirit of the university, that though you didn't agree, but you still wanted to have a discussion. That is the thing. That is real academic freedom and respect for pluralism. Now, a word about the title, which you must be knowing about the seven-valued Jain logic. This room is hot, it's not hot, it is hot and not hot, it is hot but not describable, it is not hot, goes on. Which is interesting because once I was taking a class, I asked everyone who is from Delhi, lift your hand. Some people. Then I said, everyone who is not happy with the boss you are working with. So somebody raised a hand, then brought it down, then somebody after some looking at raised it. In other words, there are questions to which there is no binary answer. And the same thing applies to the Arab Spring, which, as already mentioned, was a Western coinage. Well, let me put it this way. Decolonization, if you look at it, there are three phases. Political, 47 India became free politically. Economic, that takes more time. Though, actually, there is no freedom, economic freedom. What is interdependence. No country can be autarkic. But intellectual decolonization, that takes longer. Except that when the political struggle for independence was going on, there was more decolonization of the mind than perhaps now. You see? So it's never a straight line. It's a little sort of zigzag. Now, Tunisia, there is an elementary mistake in the accounts given by BBC, Britannica, and everyone else. They speak of Mohammed Bouazizi. No, that's not correct. The poor guy's name was Tarek. Now, I think it is important, and I got it from this book. 14 Janvier, l'Enquête, this is the book, written by two Tunisians. They have given a almost hour-to-hour account of what was happening, on that day when Ben Ali decided to accompany his wife who was going on a pilgrimage. Now, what is interesting about the Tunisian Revolution is what I will say it was adventitious, in the sense that it was a series of accidents. Ben Ali was advised to divorce his wife. Because when I was in Tunisia, many of them told me, if only he had divorced his wife, he would still have been in power. Because her family was sort of, stealing from the state. You see? Or, if he had not accompanied his wife, because actually he went there, then he couldn't get a flight back. And even when he telephoned, the Prime Minister and others were saying, yes, President, yes, President. You know what I mean? So it was an adventitious revolution, And there are characters like Tarhouni, Seriati, the intelligence chief, security chief and all that. Now, what I would say is that you can say that it is adventitious, but you can also say that they were history's agents. Unwittingly, not knowingly, they were history's agents, as Hegel has said. You know, that sometimes the individual acts in a particular way without knowing the consequences of her or his action. You know. Anyway, interesting. Now, when Ben Ali fell in mid-January, BBC's veteran correspondent Joe Lane reported on the 17th of January that Mubarak was safe, that Egyptians are incapable of this action. You know what I mean? They are very sleepy, they accept anything. Well, that day, there was somebody who set fire to himself on that day. I don't think the BBC reported it. Anyway. Now why did BBC say that? This is what I call wish becoming father to thought. Because the West likes dictators in the rest of the world, they say that these dictators are going to be there forever. Now, this confusion between incumbency and permanency, well, you see it again and again in history. I remember 76, 79, as you mentioned, I was in Iran. One day there was a big demonstration against the Shah. As first secretary, I told my ambassador, sir, this is the beginning of the end. But he said, Fabian, what nonsense. I saw the Shah yesterday. He looked very confident. I said, sir, if I may say so, royalty is trained to look confident. So don't go by looks. Okay, now, Mubarak, sort of fell or abandoned power, abdicated for two reasons. One, of course, is the thunder from the Tahrir Square. But there was another. And the military, Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, SCAF, they, quote, invited him, unquote, to leave. Because they did not want his son, who did not have the uniform. Because the SCAF has a vast economic empire, and there is no CAG. We have the controller and auditor general, but there is no CAG who can sort of, audit into the accounts. But I should say that when Mubarak fell, I was reminded of William Wordsworth, 19, in Paris, 1790. Oh, pleasant exercise of hope and joy, for great were the auxiliars which then stood upon our side, we who were strong in love. Bliss was it in that not to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Well, I'm sorry to say that I was saying that, but then you know what happened. Now, to move fast, you should tell me when I should stop. Give me about 3 minutes, okay? I can stop any time. Why did Morsi fall? Of course he made mistakes, no doubt about it. But my view is that he fell not only because of his mistakes, or rather, his mistakes alone do not account for his fall. As I see it, and I shall be glad to be, questioned and to be corrected. As I see it, there was a bargain between an understanding between SCAF, Supreme Command, the Armed Forces, and the Muslim Brotherhood, who were in the doghouse, who were not recognized, who could not, contest in election and all that. So there was a bargain. Now, neither side was, sincere Either side was prepared to cheat the other. So each was acting Machiavellian. Only thing is that Scarf outwitted the Brotherhood. And if Morsi, even if he had not committed the mistakes, he was destined to fall, because the Scarf was not going to have anyone who is not in uniform. But again, this can be, argued. There are other ways of looking at it. Then look at the Tamarod. They suddenly appear, then a little later they suddenly disappear. So, mentioned about the deep state. Well, the deep state was there. And there was Tony Blair. There was money from UAE. There was Naguib Sawiris, one of the richest men in Egypt. Morsi had sent him a tax notice for $2.1 billion. Now he was going to pay that. So he brought down Morsi. I don't think he had to spend $2 billion for that. Now, New York Times, David Kirkpatrick has given, insightful reporting about what happened. Now, to move on to Syria. Well,
Ambassador, I'm here.
yes. In fact, you have emboldened me to speak openly. Well, I have here, correct me if I am wrong, escort Bashar al-Assad. Down with Bashar al-Assad, is it correct English?
Sorry?
Down with Bashar al-Assad, is it correct English? No, then what is it?
No, whatever they say, but when they say Dr. Bashar al-Assad, it means they started that he is not the president. You see?
Thank you. But you know what happened? Some children, school children, they scrolled something on the wall, and then the police came and took away so many of them. It was terrible. Then there was another young kid. Let me see whether I have his photo. Yes. Hamza Al-Khatib.
The boy, that's right.
13.
Yeah, which was fabricated by Al Jazeera.
But it was successful fabrication. And people said, we are all Hamza Al-Khatib.
And the way, okay, thank you. I will not.
No, please. No. We should be interactive.
You're talking about Al-Khatib, the child from Daria, right? Imagine Daria is about 7 kilometers from the very heart of Damascus. It's an outskirt of Damascus. And an incident happened there. At this time of this boy being killed by somebody, about 700 people from the town itself, a small town, have been killed by these ISIL people. The ambassador of America, ambassador of France at that time who were there, I was the deputy foreign minister at that particular time, and I was in charge of the security department in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs to facilitate the full protection of foreign embassies, with the security people. Ambassador of Turkey, all Western ambassadors, without anybody inviting them to go for, the condolences of the people, without permission from the security, because this is a place where fighting is there, where ISIL are there, terrorists are there, they are killing the people. We care for their security, but they didn't mind. They went there without permission, and they sat in the first row of the whole people. It's not a secret to say that Daraya was an underground, under the tunnels were being dug, by these terrorist ISIL people, and they know these ambassadors. They used to give to them these communication through the satellites and so on. Why did they care for a boy who was killed? I was sorry for his death, still. But they never cared about the 700 people that were killed from the police, from the security, and so on, who were trying to impose law and order and to stop. They call it, I'm afraid they call it Al-Rabi' al-Arabi, Arab Spring. But I was very pleased with this title. The title was and was not. It was a Western Rabi'a, a Western Spring, a Western planned and designed 2 decades before, since 1979. Imagine in 1979, 4 major incidents or events, episodes happened in the politics. Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and the beginning of the interfaith religious war for jihadist Al-Qaeda to fight against. This is the only way. The Iranian Revolution at the same time, which was to fuel this interfaith and religious wars, proxy wars in the region. Saddam Hussein against Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr was again in 1979, and after 2 years, the war against Iran, supported by who? Financed, armed. It's by the American and even by the Arabs, the same Arabs, except Syria. And also in 1979, 70, it became David Accord. So there has been changes at that particular time. This is new to how it went up to 2001 September 11 attacks, which was the beginning of the unleash of military power of America, and then 2003 the war against Iraq. Their own man who has fought for them against Iran, destroyed Iraq. This is a part of the strategy. And what they said openly, our aim is to reshape the politics in the Middle East. What is to reshape? To oust those leaders, as the Dean has said, monarchical. Yes, they were not touched. Why? Is there democracy? Is there human rights there? But they were the allies of the West and so on, and they were also sitting on the oil and which they want. Why it's only the secularists?
That's a very interesting question.
Okay. So, was it an Arab? It was, no. It was Western, and by the way, I put it there, Al-Rabi' al-Arabi in Arabic. It's only the dot on top, al-Ain. If you put the dot al-Arabi, you put the dot al-Gharbi, Western. You see. Now, and it was not the people's choice. It is not the people who wanted this. It is land designed to serve the new requirements of the new hegemonic world order of the Western world and so on. And that's why Republicans, secularists, who say no to Israel, who say no to America, who say yes to nationalism, who say Arab nationalism, who say yes to resistance, who say yes to political independent resolution. Oh, you finish. But It is Europe spring in the same thing, the world order. It is America spring. See what's happening in Europe. I mean, it's really strange that this is not democracy, because if hegemonic world power led by the United States is in this way, it is not democracy, it is dictatorial. It is world dictatorial, The world is changing, people mentally are changing. Is it civil war in Syria, Libya, Egypt, and so on? I don't think so. It is a proxy war. I'm sorry for...
That's okay, but thank you for a very interesting point. That makes it interactive. But I'll make one very brief comment. This 1979 invasion of Afghanistan, Soviet Union was fooled into doing it by a man called Brzezinski, who wanted to get the Soviet military entangled in somewhere so that Brzezinski was from Poland and other East European countries could rise up in revolt without the Soviet military intervening. But we have time to talk about it later. Now, to go back, but anyway, I got a lot of material when I do my second edition. Okay, now to go back to Syria, there were external powers adding fuel to the fire. There was search for peace, sincere and insincere. Kofi Annan, Brahmi, de Mistura. Now, what is interesting is that Kofi Annan, former Secretary General, but he conducted the first Geneva conference in June 2012. Nobody from Syria was present there. And he thought, that this conference, decisions could be implemented. Is that diplomacy? So that is how I said, but let me also say, when the United Nations engages in diplomacy, you can take a horse to the stream, but can you make it drink? Now, let's move on. Libya. Now, there I make an interesting point. Sarkozy, 2007 presidential election. Before that election, as minister, he went to Syria and to Libya, and Gaddafi ordered up to 50 million should be paid to support our friend. Now, I have got here, you'll see it when you look at the book, the actual order by Gaddafi in Arabic. I've translated it into English. And that is why Sarkozy went out of his way to prop up a external regime, in a government in exile. And there is also reason to believe that it was a French secret agent who killed Gaddafi. You see? Now, why did Sarkozy do that? I have no answer, but I'll give you a quotation from Francois de la Rochefoucauld, 1613-1680. Nearly everyone is pleased to acknowledge a small debt. Many are grateful in acknowledging a moderate one, but there is hardly a man who does not, for a really great indebtedness, return ingratitude. Well, probably that is the explanation, but you never know. Now, again, about Gaddafi, he was willing to step down. Actually, the Americans were told that, he was willing to step down, but they didn't want to do anything because they had this other idea. You know what I mean? So, now we have I'm going to Yemen. Well, my view is that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will not permit any democracy in that peninsula or in the Arab world if they can help it. And as you know, the armed forces were sent in the middle of March, and the revolt in Bahrain collapsed, though that's not the end of the story. As we know, in Bahrain there is a Shia majority and there is Sunni monarchy, and let's see what happens. Now, another thing about, just to go back to Yemen for a second, Trump wanted to make a lot of money by selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, he did make a lot of money. He is throwing something to MBS, you see. And one would have thought that with Biden it will be a different story. But I'm sorry to say, Biden also ditto. In fact, the West, UK, France, Germany, they all have been selling weapons. Sometimes they say, no, we have to look at it. But after looking at it for a short while, they redo it again. In fact, UK, there was a parliamentary resolution, but they got away with it. See, my view is that, when war crimes are committed, bombing a hospital, bombing a wedding, bombing a funeral, that is a war crime. So what I'm saying here is that if a war crime is committed by A, all those who are supplying the wherewithal to commit the said crime are also responsible for it. Equally, if a war crime is committed by A, all those who have the power to stop A from committing the said crime and willfully do not use that power are morally guilty. So, Algeria, we mentioned it. My view is that 1962, Algeria got independence. Did Algerians get freedom? No. They are still looking for it. Power was transferred from France to FLN, Front National de Libération, and to the its armed wing, the Algerian military, but it didn't reach the Algerian people. In fact, I also dealt with the Black Decade, 1990 onwards, when the Islamic Salvation Front got electoral victory, and then they sort of stopped the election. And there was a lot of killing, and the French intelligence and the Algerian intelligence, they worked together. There were some monks who were also murdered, French monks, it's all described there. Sudan also is covered, but again it's a, unfolding story, what I mean. I also raised the question whether, because of the Arab Spring, women's rights have seen better days or not. So I've done some updating, and as already mentioned, you see, when the Islamic State was getting established in a part of Syria, the Defense Intelligence of the United States reported, it's a good thing, because we can use it against him, meaning President Bashar al-Assad. You see? In other words, in fact, Obama is responsible, because when they were coming from Syria to Mosul, it's not a short distance. America controlled the sky. They knew that they were coming, and America could have stopped them from coming. But instead of that, Obama was busy putting pressure on the Iraqi Prime Minister to enlarge his cabinet and all that. So they captured Mosul, second largest city, lot of money, almost $500 million, and also weapons. Now, Obama's role in facilitating the capture of Mosul, I'm not sure whether it has been covered by many. So then there is a chapter on reflections. Well, it has been said that Islam and democracy or modernity don't go together. And then they say, oh, 7th century, what was happening? There were the righteous, rulers. And there was no democracy. But I am asking them, in 7th century, where was democracy in Europe? Tell me. Was there democracy in Europe? 5th century, Western Roman Empire had fallen. And gradually, the Pope was putting it together. So what I'm trying to say is that, this incompatibility between modernity, democracy, and Islam, it is an argument which doesn't hold water. It is your prejudice. It is your Islamophobia. It is your inability to understand that there is pluralism in the world. It is not just one religion or one race or one ideology. Human civilization is much richer, and we all have to coexist together. Well, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a kind of detailed account about the contents and thought contents discussed in the book. Now let's move on to the discussion part. This will be moderated by Tabatala Adam, and we have two experts. One is Professor Chaulia, and we have Professor Amora for a discussion about 20 minutes.
Yes.
Well,
20 minutes overall.
okay, well, just to speak for 7 minutes.
Okay.
Or 10 or 15.
Please, I feel like it.
Well, thank you very much for anyway, any effort for writing an Arab Spring, in the end of the day, will lead to unravel the truth. Because several writers have written, of course, each from his perspective of ideology, from his political, ideological, belonging or belief in that respect. But to be frank, very few from the Arab perspective, especially from the countries that have suffered from that Arab Spring, have written. And if they have written, actually they have written in their own Arabic language, which cannot, and this is one of the fault lines of those. That's why it lies in the responsibility of translators to translate that. I have written a book about Arab Spring in that respect. It is under publication. Actually, last week, I am teaching politics for the Middle East and North Africa, and one of the topics that I have given is about Arab Spring. And to me, as I look at it, and as the developments that have said, we have spoken and seen, it is not an Arab revolution. One, it was designed and planned beforehand to achieve a strategic political end, but with a very vicious mechanism and tools, that is using religion as one way, sectarianism, tribalism, clans, interface, exactly as what has happened in the 30-year war between Protestant and Catholics that started at that, but in fact it was for political reasons and for power, who will have the supreme power in Europe and to the Middle East. The end, the collapse collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, the rise of the hegemonic world order, these 2011, first 2001 attacks, paved the way and the plan. It's really, we have to control this world. And they said it openly, even in the US-American strategic security strategy. They said it is an opportunity to us to lead the world by power, by economy, by the norms and values that we have, and we have to seize this opportunity. And they started in Afghanistan, in Iraq. The most important is how to control the Middle East, how to control the oil, the energy, because that is very important. They have done whatever. My question is, did they use Islam as a tool? I can say yes. Because in Tunis, the first event, Ghannouchi, the Al-Nahda, the leader of Al-Nahda party, was in France. And he is the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood movement in Tunisia. He right away, the second day he came to Tunisia, although he was in exile and he was in opposition, and led the movement. So that in Libya also the Muslim Brotherhood has done the same. In Iraq, in Syria, the Turks. In Syria, Khalid Mash'al, the Palestinian Hamas, he was in Syria. And he was given every support political, but he is a leader of Hamas, and Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood, supported by Qatar. Qatar gave him the money. And the whole Middle Arab Spring in Syria was because Syria rejected the Qatar project for the laying of the gas pipeline to Jordan, to Egypt, Jordan, etc., and to Syria. At that time, I was negotiating with that. We said, okay, but in order to do it, because we have gas, and because the Iraqi have gas, and because the Iranians have gas, instead of having the diameter, we should do it bigger, wider, to accommodate all the gas so that we will have the hub for all the gas in the region. The Qataris didn't accept. So the Qataris, at the first instance, they wanted to go through Saudi Arabia, southern of Iraq, coming to Jordan and to Syria. The Saudis rejected. And when they rejected the Syrian offer, that was in beginning 2010, they said, okay, then that was the way, changed the government of Syria, and they started this the whole Arab Spring issue. Now, is it democracy? Is it, I cannot believe that the people's revolution would destroy schools, hospitals, churches, mosques. They will commit every act of terror and of pain against the people. Now, what is the justification for 170,000 mercenaries came from outside everywhere to Syria? This is United Nations report, to fight. So is it a civil war? No. Why is that then coming? So there has been a new policy in the region. Syria always supported Hamas, supported Palestinian resistance, Hezbollah resistance, having good relations with Iran. Okay, but at the same time, had good relation with Turkey. Turkey is Sunni, if they are saying. Iran is Shia, it's all right. But because of the positions that we have a cause, and that cause we have to liberate our occupied lands and so on, the Golan, and we have to preserve the rights of the Palestinians. No, you are a terrorist, would be better for the world and the region if jihadists and terrorists and Islamists control and the Syria and Iraq and Jordan, what would happen? Now, this is really, where is the sovereignty of a state? So in very few words, I would say, we need more effort. Okay, I accept. I listen to what others say. But from what they say, I can tell how to respond. But to respond not emotionally, to respond practically, academically, politically, economically. You know, Syria, you know, by the way, Mr. Dean, before Arab Spring, Syria had no single dollar as debt. And exporting about 650,000 barrels every day. Now, the huge destruction, we had self-sufficiency in food. Wheat, cereal, fruits, and we used to export to Jordan, to Algeria, to Lebanon. We didn't have this. But now we are really in a very difficult situation. The dollar was 50 liras, Syrian lira. Now it's almost 4,500, fluctuating, you know. Hundreds and hundreds of schools were destroyed, of hospitals, of churches, of clergymen, men of Christians, you know, they wanted to incite this. This is not an Arab Spring, it is a Western designed movement in order, called it Arab Spring. Because the players are not Arab. The players, the actors who are acting are not Arab. Some of Arab countries, yes. But is it in a spring? The spring is a blue zone, is nice, yeah. But it came in bad results for grievances and for disasters. Time is running anyway. Thank you very much for your introduction and your book. And I really want to have a copy. I can buy it, don't worry. Because to read it, and then we will communicate. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador Fabian and Ambassador Amora and Dr. Cholia for your comments. So we can now first open the floor to questions from audience, and then I'm having a couple of questions we can ask at the end. So if audience, yes, Dean Sudarshan.
I just wanted to say, I learned a lot. I read Ambassador Fabian regularly. Not a very well-known journal, Madras Korea. Some of the things you remarked, we had a speaker, Sainath, P. Sainath, the journalist. His forthcoming book is a set of interviews with freedom fighters in India who have survived. And since he began the book, there were a few more, and now there are a few less, a handful of them. And he quoted one of them, and you used the same words about Algeria, that we fought for independence and freedom, and we got independence. This is about India. So I think, we have to think about some of these things. And the other thought that occurred to me was, I'm wearing an Indonesian shirt, I know something about the country. The people there say, Suharto was all right until his children grew up. And when his children grew up, they got into all these big deals with, the big banks, Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, whatever. And got into all kinds of projects because for the banks, the guarantee was the president's palace and its inmates. And then here is this Javanese president who says, if I don't stand beside my children, do you think my neighbor would? So we have these issues. We have them here. So much to think about. So thank you very much. I have another meeting, so I have to go. I just wanted to express my thanks to you and to the very incisive comments from all the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So you want just to respond to that on the corruption issue. That is one of the big part of the public perception that the regimes are not, because look, China is also authoritarian. There is high level of corruption, but I don't think, and I've been there multiple times, I don't think that disaffection in the society as much as you see in the Middle East, right? So the perception and the reality of corruption in these regimes, that's something I think you should talk about.
As regards corruption, you see, let's start with Tunisia. Tunisia, after independence, did one good thing. Education. The level of education in Tunisia was much higher. Even university education. But then you see the economy could not provide the jobs. In fact, I was told that, if you have got a university degree, you can't get a job. But if you have just into school, then you can get a job. So the educated unemployment, that became a big issue. And even that Tarek Bouazizi, it has been said, it was not exactly that he was not making enough money for feeding his family. It was a question of dignity. And that is why some of the Arab scholars wanted to call it dignity revolution. So corruption is very much there. And in Egypt, there was that book by the dentist, whose name you might recall, about corruption. You see? So corruption is very much there. But let me also make one point about Arab Spring. See, one of the reasons, the man called it Obama Spring. You mentioned that Georgetown University professor, Lynch. He called it Obama Spring. Why? That is because many political scientists in America believe in what I call a solar system of international order. America as a sun, and others sort of, the planets revolving around it. That's why he called it Obama Spring. But he also had another thought. 1848, what happened in Europe? Well, it just lasted 1 year. 1848, 1849, by 1850 it was put down. You see, in other words, the man who coined the term expected it to fail, expected it to last only for its life, as, what shall I say, passager, as temporary, as a spring. The spring. So blue sky, but soon the clouds come. So that thought also was there. This is what I call wish becoming father to thought. Now coming to the point about the West or somebody else, CIA or Israel did it, well, I'll put it this way. The State Department had spent much money to spread IT skills and all that. But with all that, I would submit to you that history cannot be engineered. Tarek Bouazizi was not in touch with the CIA. Revolt sort of got ignited. His mother went round and all that. He was not in touch. But it is true that once it all started, these foreign powers, they had their own interests and they intervened to serve their own different interests. But basically, history cannot be engineered. You can do something here, there, and all that. But this is not physics, this is not chemistry. These are human affairs. But let me not.
Can I ask one question? I don't know whether it is there in the book or not. But anyway, I will read the book, inshallah. The situation, okay, 10 years have gone now of Arab Spring. Is the situation, political, economic stability, human rights, democratization in those countries better than what it was before? This is very important question. The second, where is the money? Is Iraq, for example, poor? Is Libya poor? Where is that wealth of Iraq and that wealth of Libya? I mean, in the sense of this, they cannot pay the salary of their employees. I mean, where is that money? Is it corruption or is it, how much money the Qatari have spent on Arab Spring? It was announced by, and the Americans and the British, and on Iraq, how much that one, that actually should be taken into consideration when analyzing. Is that social change should be for the better. But when it redraw back to the worst, no, we don't want this Arab Spring or revolution or something. Let's live in peace and security, and let's get our right and independence. This is final. Thank you.
Well, Africa, please.
No, I'm just saying, I think people don't have the hindsight. Right now, we are looking back and saying it turned out to be a lot worse. But if tens of millions of people are on the streets of Cairo saying that we want the regime to fall, you cannot mobilize, the whole society like that from outside, right? So there are grievances that have been built up over a long period of time, and they would not know that it would be worse. Now, perhaps people are so tired of this whole chaos and the instability that happened. Now, probably there is very little appetite for revolution, and but when at the moment you have to go back in time. At that time, there are the conspiracies, there are the vested interests, but I think you cannot deny that people want some change, right? I mean, that could have been hijacked and manipulated. But what he's saying is that the core, the starting point is you are living in a society where you're feeling very powerless or helpless or lacking in dignity, and where there are abuses. So there is that some kind of a universal human instinct to want to live in a more dignified system, right? So that thing is there. I mean, that it's always there, right? And that's universal. So beyond that, what happened, like you're saying, it became a tragedy. Of course, it has become a tragedy, but I think you go back in time for the people who are they said it was a leaderless revolution in Tunisia and in Egypt, right? I mean, there was no real conspiracy from outside to bring millions and millions of people on the streets, right? So it's very difficult to make the case that there was no grievance and people were so happy.
Okay. Very, very important issue, actually. How much every Friday, why every Friday these demonstrations used to, people go to the street? Because they go to the mosque to pray, and there were the groups giving them money. $100, $100. They spent that lot of money emotionally, the social media, even the imam who used to has his own people. So you could see people going to the street, taking the street, etc., just to take a photo, etc., and then goes with that money to Qardawi. I don't believe he passed away yesterday and the day before yesterday, Qardawi. I mean, many imams took to the minarets, and started to speak in the same language. Emotionally, we are emotional people. This Islamic, that's why this Islamic, political Islam, has been used as a tool because they look, what is the best thing? Money, religious, spirituality, and so on, and social media, dignity. Many governments, for example, have responded to the demands of the people right away. For example, I can tell you what happened in Syria. After a month or 3 months, we called for dialogue. We also changed the constitution. We responded, president, the government, all started to receive the people from the villages. And where they started, in Syria, where they started not from the main town. I mean, in the capital or in Aleppo, they started in the countryside, in the villages. Because people there, they need money, they are not well aware, they are more spiritually driven towards, so they studied each country, what is the best way to motivate them, to incite them, to push them to go and participate in this, take a photo. And many times this eyewitness issue, it has become a scandal. Eyewitness issue, giving fake news, lies. It's a long story. Anyway, thank you.
Have questions first and then we take the comments.
His Excellency, thank you for writing on this topic and thank you for coming here to discuss it with us. I didn't get a chance to read this book yet, but
May I know your name, please?
Sir Harshit.
Harshad.
I didn't get a chance to read this book, but I would rely on Professor Cholia's words that Iranian Greek movement has not been mentioned in this book. So, according to you, clearly it falls in the wasn't category of the Arab Spring. So my question to you is that what is it, so apart from the time difference of about 2 years, what is it that make scholars not want to consider the Green movement a part of or at least a precursor to the Arab Spring? Because there are many parallels that can be drawn between the two events.
Thank you. Should we take more questions? Yeah?
More questions?
One.
Yeah, sure. More questions and then. Sure.
Okay.
First of all, sir, thank you for coming over here. My question is also etymological. My name is Sarthak, I'm a master's student, and my question is that you have focused alongside Professor Amura on the spring nature of the Arab Spring, how the spring itself was not perhaps the best description of it. My question is on the word Arab itself. So when we speak of the Arab Spring as the Arab Spring, then we are not focusing on the other communities or the other ethno-linguistic communities, the Turks, the Kurds or the Iranians, as you also mentioned. So is this also a westernized concept being imposed on the very situation as to how this how it is generalized, it is an Arab Spring, whereas it is also comprising of many other communities as a part of it.
More questions?
Good evening, distinguished professors and ambassador of India. I was listening to you and you said that Islam and democracy can go together. You just quoted that. When you scroll through the history, you would be. It's a very difficult process to find a true democracy in the Muslim world. There has never been a true democracy anywhere in the Muslim world. And if you go through so there's this westernized concept of human rights and preservation of women rights and LGBTQ rights, and etc. And then there's the aspect of economic growth, human development, and the overall well-being of the population. And when you look at these records, it's very clear that dictatorship or monarchy and Islam, they do go together. And it's better for the world and also for the MENA region that this competition stays intact.
Okay.
Me?
Okay, so my question is, sir, I'm also a master's master's student. My name is Shabu. So my question is related to the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia, because as earlier you have mentioned, the Yemen is still unstable because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not interested in bringing a democratic regime. So, but I feel like the proxy wars in the region is like a war between the Shias and the Sunnis, like between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So what do you think, whether this Cold War will have ever a future of end or having any emissivity of peace to bring the region?
Last question. Last question.
Last
Only
one,
last
yeah.
question.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Vishal. My question to you is that in the pamphlet which we received, it was said that you had successfully done the evacuation of almost 176,000 Indians during this Arab Spring time. So my question to you is that when you were planning the entire evacuation, did you ever think that there could be somewhere, some time that things could go horribly wrong during that particular time of chaos? Like you said at the very beginning, that history cannot be entirely engineered or fabricated, that we all are in essence living in a moment of history. So did you ever think that anything or everything could possibly go wrong and it would go downhill?
Thank you for all the questions. Let me start with the last one first. You see that evacuation of 176,000 was in 1990-91.
The
When-
Gulf War.
Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein went to have a picnic in Kuwait and decided to overstay there. So, well, in this case also we did evacuate our people from Yemen and others.
2015.
It was done very well. So, I mean, that was a different one. You know what I mean? That was a different exercise. So, am I clear? I mean, or, okay, have I answered your question?
My question is that in your mind, when you were planning that very evacuation
Yeah.
process,
Yeah.
did you ever feel that something could go wrong in the future?
Something could go wrong in the future.
When the evacuation was actually taking place?
Oh,
And
many
somewhere you had made a mistake or any other doubts that came to your mind?
Let's keep it to Arab Spring. Huh?
Yeah.
This is 1990.
Yeah, we can talk about it later, if possible. Now, regarding the Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the implication or that what is happening in Yemen is it's a proxy war. Well, I beg to differ. The people of Yemen wanted democracy. They wanted to get rid of Saleh, who probably is the longest dictator. He started.
Almost 30 years.
More than that. More
20,
than that. He was in North Yemen, then the two.
Almost 40 years.
Yeah, because he was in North Yemen first, and then the two Yemen got together when I was Joint Secretary Gulf in 1990 or 91, and then he continued. You know what I mean? So, the people of Yemen wanted democracy. Now, it is true that Saudi Arabia did come in the way, and it is true that Iran is supporting, the Houthis. It's correct. All that is correct. But don't look at it as a proxy war. There are real people getting killed, real people fighting. And my view is that Saudi Arabia has been chasing a mirage. In a desert, you see the mirage and you go after the mirage, then the mirage also goes away. Military victory in Yemen is impossible for Saudi Arabia. With all the weapons of America and of the West. And they have realized it. There is a ceasefire, it's going on, they're talking. So let's hope there will be sanity and peace in Yemen. Incidentally, Yemen, olden times, it was called, Arabia Lucky. In Pliny's time, Arabia, Lucky Arabia, and the other was Arabia Deserta. What is Saudi Arabia was the desert. You see? And there was the old civilization, Solomon's wife, she went from there, or from Yemen, it was all close by. So they have a glorious civilizational this thing. Now coming to Islam and democracy, the answer is short. Indonesia has a Muslim majority, correct? Malaysia has?
The largest in the world.
Yes.
Indonesia.
Yeah, and Malaysia has?
So Malaysia is disputable, sir, because it's got a one-party rule for the last
I know, but
60,
still,
70 years.
I know,
No
but-
turnover of power.
No, the Prime Minister is being sent to jail.
But that's a reason. See, the same coalition has been governing since independence without any change.
Yeah, that is true, but the point is they have been holding elections. At least Indonesia,
Incumbent,
yeah,
if there's no turnover of power,
yeah, I agree.
it's
I mean,
doubtful.
Yeah, you can. But the point is,
Indonesia, yes.
And let me give you one more example. Gaza. Gaza, there was an election, and a party won. You know who? And who stood in the way? Israel and the West. They did not want it. We know that. Okay? So let us not come to the conclusion that Islam and democracy are incompatible. And coming to Egypt, 1882, there was a clear move towards a limited monarchy. Colonel Urabi, he led the movement. Yeah. And then what happened? The French and the British, who had given a lot of money, loans to the king, they were not sure that if there is democracy, they will get their money back. So they resorted to gunboat diplomacy, and the colonel was sent to Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and he died there. In other words, the West stood in the way of democracy. And one more example. 1953 Iran. Mossadegh was taking Iran towards democracy. And who stood in the way? Britain and CIA. They spent, I am told, only $10,000. So,
What about Hitler?
pardon?
Hitler and the democracy of Hitler at that time. I mean, he was elected and he had this and this still
No.
he
No, so
turned
the question
to
is about Islam. The
Huh?
question is about Islam in
Yeah,
particular.
yeah, Hitler used democracy to get elected and then undermined democracy. Okay, then there was a question about etymology. Why do you call it Arab? You see, if you look at the West Asia, you have the Arab world, and then you have Iran. There's much in common, but there is a certain distinction. You see? And I called it Arab Spring because that is a nomenclature used by everyone. Now, when you write a book, you have to use what people understand. If you say something else, they won't understand. And I think, honestly, there was an Arab Spring, starting from Tunisia, going to Egypt, then Libya, then there was a virus circulating. I don't think it was entirely virtuous. I don't think it was entirely unvirtuous either. It is always a mix. Human affairs, you don't get anything pure or anything totally impure. So there was an Arab Spring and we are talking about it. And if I didn't deal with what was happening in Iran, well, it is true. What happened in Iran would have influenced, you know what I mean. But nevertheless, it must have influenced because news spreads, you know what I mean. But there was, and in the next edition, I will certainly include that. And did I? Okay. Now, mention was made about $100 being given in the mosque and all that, and that why the demonstrations happened only on Fridays. Yes, you're right, some money may have passed, but let's also face the reality. In many of these countries, people, only the imam could speak freely in the mosque. They could not speak freely elsewhere. So they spoke in the mosque. And it is customary, for people to listen to the imam and then act thereupon. And that is a place where they get together. So money may have changed hands, but that doesn't give the full explanation. You see? And another question, are things better? Certainly not. Things are better in 2010, 2011. I mean, Tunisians told me, well, things are much better because, the economic growth stalled and a lot of chaos and all that. But, as I said earlier, history cannot be engineered. And there is a law operating in history called the law of unintended consequences. Something is started by somebody, but then other people also respond. So there is no way we can foresee the consequences. And, Hitler, with great enthusiasm, he attacked Poland, 1939. And he talked about a 1,000-year Reich, 1,000 years. Then what happened? So, unintended consequences. And there is one more law, then I will stop. And that is, human beings never or seldom learn from history. That is another law.
So it will repeat again.
Well, we are not Homo sapiens sapiens. I don't know why we call ourselves wise twice. May I stop? If anything unanswered, did I?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So now we are reaching the final moments of this session. I would like first, on behalf of Gender Center for the Global South and School of International Affairs, to thank Ambassador Fabian for your time. Your presence has been very valuable to us today, and certainly we are looking forward to another interaction in the future. Thank you very much, Professor. Yeah. And of course, I must mention my deep sense of appreciation to Dean Sholia and Ambassador Amora. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And of course, here this is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your
Thank you.
planning. Great having you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Always good.
थोड़ा सा प्रोजेक्टर की लाइट आ रही है ना
Yeah. Please. Please.
That's all.